The winter of 1873 came early to the Montana Territory, bringing with it a fury that even the old-timers hadn't seen in years. Snow fell in great white curtains across the grasslands, burying fence posts and erasing the trails that connected the scattered ranches to the nearest town of Cedar Ridge. The wind howled down from the mountains like a living thing, carrying ice crystals that cut exposed skin like tiny knives. Through this merciless landscape, a lone figure stumbled. Sarah Whitman's dress, once blue calico, hung in frozen tatters around her thin frame. Her shawl, inadequate even for autumn, provided no protection against the brutal cold. Ice crystals clung to her dark hair, and her lips had turned an alarming shade of purple. Each step through the knee-deep snow required enormous effort, and she had long ago lost feeling in her feet. She had been walking since dawn, though in the swirling white it was impossible to tell how many hours had passed. The good people of Cedar Ridge had made it clear she was no longer welcome. The whispers had started months ago. A young widow living alone, taking in washing, sometimes seen talking to the men who brought their clothes. Then came the accusation from Mrs. Hartley, the banker's wife, claiming she'd seen Sarah in compromising circumstances with her husband. It didn't matter that it wasn't true. In a small town, reputation was everything, and Sarah's had been destroyed with surgical precision. The final blow had come yesterday when her landlord, pressured by the town's moral guardians, had evicted her. "Can't have your type here," he'd said, not meeting her eyes. "Bad for business." They'd given her until sunset to leave. No one would hire her, sell to her, or even speak to her. She'd become invisible, except for the stones thrown by children and the cruel words hissed by their mothers. Now, as darkness began to fall and the temperature plummeted further, Sarah knew she was dying. Her body shook uncontrollably, beyond shivering into something more primitive and desperate. Through the snow, she glimpsed a structure, a barn, its dark shape barely visible through the storm. With the last of her strength, she stumbled toward it. The barn belonged to the Morrison Ranch, though Sarah didn't know it. She pushed against the door with numb hands, nearly sobbing when it swung open. The relative warmth inside felt like stepping into summer, though it was still well below freezing. Horses shifted in their stalls, steam rising from their bodies. The smell of hay and manure was overwhelmingly welcome after the sterile cold outside. Sarah collapsed against the wall, pulling scattered hay around herself with hands that no longer worked properly. Her thoughts were becoming clouded, fragmented. She thought of her late husband, dead these 2 years from pneumonia. She thought of the life she'd once imagined. Children, a small house, Sunday dinners. All of it gone now, scattered like snow in the wind. The cold was seeping deeper, past her skin into her bones, into her very soul. She couldn't feel her body anymore, which was almost a mercy. Her eyes drifted closed. Thomas Morrison pulled his collar higher against the wind as he made his way to the barn. At 35, he was considered young to own such a substantial spread. But years of hard work and careful management had built the ranch into something profitable. The storm worried him. His cattle were sheltered in the far pasture, but he needed to check the horses and ensure they had enough feed to last through what promised to be a long siege of weather. He pushed open the barn door, lantern held high, and stopped short. There was someone here, a heap of fabric and hay against the far wall. His first instinct was wariness. Drifters sometimes sought shelter in barns, and not all of them were harmless. But as he moved closer, he realized this was no threat. It was a woman, and she was nearly dead. Thomas set the lantern down and knelt beside her. Her skin, when he touched her face, was like ice. Her lips were blue, her breathing so shallow he had to lean close to detect it. Ice crystals had formed on her eyelashes, and her dress was stiff with frost. "Ma'am," he shook her gently, then more urgently. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" No response. Thomas had seen enough death on the frontier to recognize its approach. If he left her here, she'd be gone within the hour, maybe less. He didn't hesitate. Scooping her into his arms, she weighed almost nothing. Like a bird, He pushed back out into the storm. The house was only 50 yards away, but it felt like miles. The wind tried to tear her from his grasp, and snow blinded him. But Thomas Morrison was not a man who gave up easily. Inside the house, he laid her on the rug before the fireplace and quickly built up the flames. The warmth seemed to have no effect. Her skin remained that terrible gray-white color, and her breathing grew even shallower. He grabbed blankets from the chest, piling them on her, but knew it wasn't enough. He'd seen men lose fingers and toes to frostbite, seen others slip away despite all efforts to warm them. There was another way. The mountain men talked about it, how the only way to save someone from freezing was skin-to-skin warmth, one body heating another. It was improper, scandalous even. But propriety meant nothing when weighed against a human life. Thomas carried her to his bedroom, working quickly to remove her frozen dress. He kept his eyes averted as much as possible, maintaining what dignity he could for her. Then, stripping to his union suit, he got into bed and pulled her against him, wrapping the heavy quilts around them both. Her skin was shockingly cold, like holding ice, for hours. He held her as the storm raged outside. Slowly, impossibly slowly, warmth began to seep from his body into hers. Her breathing deepened. The terrible blue faded from her lips. She began to shiver, a good sign. The body fighting back. It was near dawn when she stirred, a small sound escaping her throat. Thomas had dozed fitfully, afraid to sleep deeply lest she slip away while he wasn't watching. Now he felt her tense as consciousness returned. "Easy," he said quietly. "You're safe. You nearly froze by the barn. I brought you inside." She went rigid with fear or shame. He couldn't tell which. In the dim light, he could see her eyes were wide, confused. "I'm Thomas Morrison. This is my ranch. You were dying from the cold. This was the only way to warm you enough to save your life." Understanding dawned in her eyes, followed quickly by tears. Whether from relief, embarrassment, or something else, he couldn't say, but she was alive, and that was what mattered. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the Montana Territory. But inside the small ranch house, two strangers shared warmth against the cold, unaware that this moment of desperate survival would change both their lives forever. Sarah Whitman woke to unfamiliar warmth and the sound of wood crackling in a fireplace. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was or how she'd gotten here. Then memory crashed over her like a wave. The storm, the barn, the terrible cold that had seemed to freeze her very soul. And then, nothing. She was in a bed, a real bed with a proper mattress and heavy quilts. The room was simple but clean, with rough-hewn furniture and a single window showing nothing but swirling white. Her dress hung on a chair near the fireplace, dried but badly torn. Someone had dressed her in a man's shirt that fell past her knees. Panic seized her throat. Where was she? What had happened? The last thing she remembered was collapsing in a barn, ready to die. The door opened, and a man entered carrying a tray. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sandy hair and kind blue eyes that held a wariness she recognized. People looked at wild animals that way, creatures that might bolt or bite if startled. "You're awake," he said simply, setting the tray on the bedside table. "I brought some broth. You need to eat." Sarah pulled the quilts higher, acutely aware of her improper state. "Where? Who are you?" "Thomas Morrison. This is my ranch. You near froze to death in my barn last night." He kept his distance, clearly trying not to frighten her. "The storm's still going. You're safe here until it passes." Safe. The word felt foreign. She hadn't been safe in months, not since the whispers started. "My dress," she began. "It's there, by the fire, though it's seen better days." He gestured to the chair. "My late wife's clothes are in that trunk. You're welcome to them if anything fits." Late wife. So he was a widower too. "I shouldn't be here," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "If people knew your reputation." Something flashed in his eyes, anger, but not at her. "People can think what they like. I don't leave folks to die in blizzards. You don't understand." The words tumbled out. They say I'm... She couldn't finish, couldn't speak the ugly words aloud. I know who you are, Thomas said quietly. Sarah Whitman, widow of James Whitman. The town turned on you over some fool gossip. He shook his head. Cedar Ridge loves its scandals more than Christian charity. She stared at him, stunned. You knew, and still brought you in, still saved your life. He moved to the window, looking out at the storm. Ma'am, I've lived alone on this ranch for 3 years, since my Elizabeth died. I know what loneliness is. I know what it's like when folks whisper. But I also know the difference between gossip and truth. The truth doesn't matter in town, Sarah said bitterly. No, it doesn't, but it matters here. He turned back to her. You eat that broth and rest. There's water in the pitcher for washing. Like I said, help yourself to anything in that trunk that fits. I'll be seeing to the animals. He started to leave, then paused. I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it clear. Last night, when I found you, you were dying. The cold had gone too deep. Blankets weren't enough. The only way to warm someone that far gone is... He cleared his throat, color rising in his weathered cheeks. Body heat, direct body heat. I kept you alive the only way I could, and I kept it as proper as circumstances allowed. But I understand if you feel compromised. Sarah felt her face burn with embarrassment, but also something else. This man had saved her life, had held her through the night not from improper desire, but from simple human decency. In a world that had shown her nothing but cruelty, he had shown kindness. Thank you, she whispered. He nodded once and left, closing the door softly behind him. Sarah ate the broth slowly, feeling strength return to her limbs. Through the window, she could see him fighting his way through the snow toward the barn, a lone figure against the white fury of the storm. When she felt strong enough, she rose and opened the trunk. The clothes smelled faintly of lavender and sadness. Elizabeth Morrison had been smaller than Sarah, but not by much. She found a simple brown dress and undergarments, dressing quickly in the cold room. The house was larger than she'd expected. A main room with a kitchen and living area, 2 bedrooms, and a small study lined with books. Everything spoke of a life interrupted. A woman's apron still hung on a hook. A half-finished sampler sat in a basket by a chair. Sarah built up the fire and explored the kitchen. The least she could do was prepare a meal. She found salt pork, beans, flour for biscuits. Simple fare, but filling. As she worked, she felt in strange peace. For months, she'd been unwanted, untouchable. Here, in this snow-locked house, she was simply a woman cooking a meal. Thomas returned at midday, stomping snow from his boots. He stopped short, seeing her dressed and working in the kitchen. You should be resting, he said. I've rested enough, and I don't take charity without giving something back. She set a plate before him. Sit, eat. He sat, and they ate in silence that wasn't quite comfortable but wasn't hostile either. The storm howled around the house like a living thing, sealing them in this strange bubble of domesticity. How long will it last? Sarah asked. The storm? 2-3 days, maybe. Longest I've seen was a week. He glanced at her. You're welcome here until it's safe to travel. And then... He was quiet for a moment. Where were you headed when you left town? She laughed, a bitter sound. Away, that's all, just away. No family, no place to go? My husband's family is in Ohio. They made it clear they wanted nothing to do with me after James died. My own people are gone. She stood, began clearing plates. I thought maybe I could find work in another town, somewhere they didn't know me. The territorial gossip mill runs far, Thomas said gently. Stories have a way of following. Then I'll go farther, California maybe, or Oregon. In winter, alone? He shook his head. That's a death sentence different from freezing, but just as final. What choice do I have? The words came out sharper than intended. I can't go back to Cedar Ridge. No decent person will have me under their roof. You're under my roof. You're not... She stopped, flustered. Not decent? A small smile played at his lips. The first she'd seen. Most in town would agree with you there. Man living alone, keeping to himself, barely coming to town except for supplies. They whisper about me, too. Mrs. Whitman. Please, just Sarah. Sarah. Then, and I'm Thomas. He stood, moved to add wood to the fire. My point is, I know something about being outside their precious circle. Maybe that's why I don't give a damn what they think. She watched him work, seeing the competence in his movements, the quiet strength. He was younger than she'd first thought, maybe only a handful of years older than her own 26 years. Grief had aged him. She recognized the signs. Your wife, she said carefully. How long? 3 years come spring. Fever took her. Doctor couldn't come because of flooding. I sat with her for 4 days, watching her slip away. His voice was steady, but she heard the pain beneath. Buried her on the hill behind the house, where she liked to watch the sun set. I'm sorry. He shrugged. We all carry our sorrows. Question is what we do with them. That night, the storm worsened. The house shook under the wind's assault. Thomas insisted Sarah take the bedroom while he bedded down near the fire. She lay in the dark, listening to the fury outside, thinking about the strange turn her life had taken. Yesterday she'd been ready to die. Today she was warm, fed, and, strangest of all, treated with dignity. In the main room, Thomas stared at the fire and tried not to think about the woman in his bedroom. Not in any improper way, but with a recognition he hadn't expected. He'd been alone so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone else in the house, to cook for two, to have conversation beyond his own thoughts. It was dangerous, this comfort. She would leave when the storm passed, had to leave, and he would be alone again. But for now, for these storm-locked days, there were two souls sheltering together against more than just the weather. And maybe, Thomas thought as sleep finally claimed him, that was enough. The storm broke on the 4th day, leaving behind a world transformed. Snow lay thick as a man's waist across the ranch, sculpting the landscape into something alien and beautiful. The sun emerged weak but determined, setting crystals sparkling like scattered diamonds. Sarah stood at the window, watching Thomas dig a path to the barn. She'd been here 4 days now, and a strange rhythm had developed between them. She cooked and kept house while he tended the animals and fought the endless battle against snow. They ate together, morning and evening, their conversations careful but gradually warming, like ice slowly melting. She hadn't meant to stay even this long. Each morning she told herself she would leave as soon as the weather permitted, but then she'd see how much needed doing: clothes to mend, bread to bake, a house that hadn't known a woman's touch in 3 years. And Thomas never pressed her to go, never made her feel unwelcome. Coffee's ready, she called through the window. He waved acknowledgement and continued shoveling. Sarah turned back to the stove, humming softly. It was an old hymn from childhood, one her mother used to sing. She hadn't hummed in months, hadn't felt anything close to contentment since before James died. The door opened, bringing a gust of cold air, and Thomas, cheeks red from exertion. Path's clear to the barn and pump, he announced, stomping snow from his boots. I'll work on the woodshed next. Sit first. Eat something. She set a plate of biscuits and preserves on the table. You've been out there 2 hours. He sat, and she poured coffee, the domestic simplicity of it making her chest tight. This was what she'd lost, what had been stolen from her, not just her reputation, but these small, precious moments of ordinary life. Sarah, his voice was careful, the road to town will be passable in a day or 2. She kept her back to him, busying herself at the stove. I see. I'm not saying you have to leave, just that you could, if you wanted. Where would I go? The words came out bitter. Another town where they'll eventually learn my story, another place to be driven from. You don't know that would happen. She turned then, meeting his eyes. Don't I? A woman alone, no family, no recommendations. At best, I might find work as a laundress or scrub woman. At worst, she shook her head. You know what they think of women like me. You're not like anything, Thomas said firmly. You're a good woman who got caught in ugly gossip. The distinction doesn't matter much when you're hungry and cold. They were quiet for a moment. Then Thomas cleared his throat. There's another option. Sarah waited, watching his face. You could stay here. I need help with the house. And come spring, there'll be a garden to tend. I can't pay much, but there's room and board. And he trailed off, color rising in his cheeks. It would be proper. You'd have the bedroom. I'd keep to the main room. Just a business arrangement. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. People would talk. Let them. It would ruin what reputation you have left. I told you, I don't care what Cedar Ridge thinks. He pushed back from the table, pacing to the window. Elizabeth wanted this place to be more than just a ranch. She had dreams. A real garden, maybe some chickens, a life beyond just surviving. After she died, I let it all go to seed. Seemed pointless without her. But watching you these past days, seeing the house come alive again. He stopped, running a hand through his hair. I'm not saying it right. I'm not asking for anything improper. Just stay. Help me make this place what it should be. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. You don't know me. I could be everything they say. I know you work hard. I know you make the best biscuits I've had since Elizabeth passed. I know you treat a stranger's house with respect. He turned to face her. That's enough. She wanted to say yes so badly it hurt. But the practical part of her, the part that had learned harsh lessons, held back. What happens when you decide you want a real wife? A proper woman to give you children? Something flickered in his eyes. Elizabeth and I tried for babies. Never came. Doctors said it was her female troubles, but I always wondered if it was me. He shrugged. Either way, I made my peace with it. As for a wife, I had one. Don't see the point in looking for another. The honesty of it, the raw pain still lingering after 3 years, made Sarah's decision for her. All right, she whispered. I'll stay. Relief crossed his face, quickly hidden. Good, that's good. That afternoon, they worked together in comfortable silence. Thomas repaired a broken chair while Sarah reorganized the pantry. As the sun began to sink, painting the snow pink and gold, he suggested they walk to the barn. I want to show you something, he said. The barn was warmer than outside, filled with the comfortable sounds of animals. Thomas led her to a stall where a mare stood, her belly round with foal. She's due come spring, he said, running a hand along the horse's neck. Elizabeth picked her out, said she had gentle eyes. Never got to see her foal, though. Sarah approached slowly, letting the mare smell her hand. The horse whickered softly, pressing her velvet nose into Sarah's palm. She's beautiful. What's her name? Penny, for her color. He watched Sarah stroke the mare's face. Do you ride? I used to, before. She didn't finish, before her life fell apart, before she became someone who walked through blizzards to die. Maybe you could again. Plenty of room out here to remember how. As they walked back to the house, Sarah slipped on a patch of ice. Thomas caught her arm, steadying her, and for a moment they stood close. His hand warmed through her coat sleeve. She could smell wood smoke and leather on him, could see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes. Careful, he said softly. Yes, she breathed, though she wasn't sure if she meant about the ice or something else entirely. He released her arm, and they continued to the house. But something had shifted between them. That night, as Sarah prepared for bed in what she was beginning to think of as her room, she allowed herself to imagine a future here. Spring would come, and with it a garden. The mare would foal. Life would continue its ancient rhythm, and she would be part of it. Through the wall, she could hear Thomas settling for the night, the creak of floorboards, the rustle of blankets. 2 lonely people sharing a roof, holding back winter and worse things. It wasn't love. Not yet, but it was something. A beginning, perhaps. A chance to build something from the ashes of their separate griefs. Outside, the Montana night stretched cold and infinite, but inside the small ranch house, two hearts began the slow, careful work of healing. Spring came slowly to the Montana territory, fighting winter for every inch of ground. By late March, patches of brown earth began showing through the snow, and the sound of running water could be heard as ice melted in the creeks. Sarah had been at the Morrison Ranch for 3 months now, and the temporary arrangement had settled into something that felt dangerously permanent. She stood in the doorway of the barn, watching Thomas work with a young colt. His patience with the animal was infinite, his movements slow and deliberate as he taught it to accept a halter. The spring sun caught the lighter threads in his hair, and Sarah found herself studying the way his shoulders moved, the gentle way his hands guided the nervous animal. "Easy now," Thomas murmured to the colt. "Nothing to fear here." The words made Sarah's chest tight. Over the months, he'd shown her the same patience, the same quiet acceptance, never pushing, never demanding, just offering steady presence and safe harbor. "Would you like to try?" Thomas called, noticing her watching. Sarah hesitated, then stepped into the corral. The colt danced away, but Thomas caught her hand. When had touching become so natural between them? And placed it on the lead rope. "Stand here," he said, positioning himself behind her to guide her movements. "Let him come to you. Don't chase." His presence at her back was warm, solid. Sarah could feel his breath stir her hair, could smell the soap he'd used that morning. The colt, sensing her distraction, stepped closer, curious. "There," Thomas said softly. "See? He knows you mean no harm." The colt nuzzled her outstretched hand, and Sarah laughed. A real laugh, bright and unexpected. Thomas stepped back quickly, as if suddenly aware of their proximity. "You're a natural," he said, his voice rougher than usual. That afternoon, they worked side by side preparing the garden plot. The soil was still cold, but Thomas said it was time to start if they wanted vegetables come summer. Sarah had found seeds in town during their monthly supply run, a tense affair where she'd endured stares and whispers while Thomas conducted business, his jaw tight with suppressed anger. "Carrots here," she said, sketching rows in the dirt. "Beans along the fence where they can climb. Potatoes in the back section." "You've thought this through," Thomas observed, leaning on his spade. "Elizabeth left good notes," Sarah admitted, holding up the journal she'd found in the kitchen. "Her plans for the garden, recipes, remedies. I hope you don't mind." "Mind?" Thomas's expression softened. She would have loved knowing someone was using them. She was always writing things down, said she wanted to leave something useful behind. They worked until sunset, the honest labor leaving them pleasantly tired. As they walked back to the house, Sarah stumbled over a hidden root. Thomas caught her, just as he had that night on the ice. But this time neither of them pulled away immediately. "Sarah," he began, then stopped, conflict clear in his eyes. "I know," she said quietly. "We can't. It wouldn't be proper." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "When has propriety ever done either of us any good? Then what's stopping us?" He released her arms, stepping back. "You work for me. You're under my protection. I won't be the kind of man who takes advantage. And if I said you weren't, if I said this was my choice too? Are you sure it is? Or is it gratitude talking? Or worse, thinking you owe me something?" He shook his head. "No. Sarah, you deserve better than questions and doubt." She wanted to argue, to tell him that what she felt went far beyond gratitude. But maybe he was right. Maybe she didn't know her own heart anymore. Couldn't trust it after everything that had happened. That night, she lay awake thinking about the way his hands had felt on her arms, the way his eyes had darkened when he looked at her. Through the wall, she could hear him moving restlessly, and wondered if he was thinking similar thoughts. The next morning brought a new challenge. Thomas had promised to help a neighboring rancher with branding, which meant teaching Sarah to handle a rifle in case of trouble while he was gone. "It's not that I expect anything," he explained, showing her how to load the Winchester. "But wolves come down from the mountains sometimes, and there's always the chance of drifters." Sarah hefted the rifle, surprised by its weight. "James never taught me, said it wasn't fitting for a woman. Nothing fitting about being helpless either." Thomas countered. "Here, hold it like this." He adjusted her stance, his hands professional but careful. Sarah tried to focus on his instructions rather than the warmth of his touch. "Breathe out slowly. Squeeze, don't pull," and the rifle cracked, and the tin can Thomas had set on a fence post went flying. Sarah gasped, then laughed with delight. "I hit it." "You did." Thomas's smile was proud. "Natural talent, like with the horses. Try again." They spent an hour practicing, until Sarah could hit more often than she missed. As Thomas prepared to leave, he seemed reluctant. "I'll be back before dark," he said. "Bar the door. Keep the rifle handy, but don't go looking for trouble." "I'll be fine. Thomas, I managed a household for years." "I know. He grabbed his hat, frustrated with his own concern. "Be careful." After he left, Sarah went about her daily tasks, but the house felt empty without him. She found herself listening for his footsteps, watching the window for his return. When had this man become so essential to her days? Mid-afternoon brought an unexpected test. A rider approached, a stranger, his clothes marking him as a drifter. Sarah grabbed the rifle, her heart pounding, and stepped onto the porch. "That's close enough," she called when he was still 20 yards away. The man pulled up, eyeing her with surprise and something else that made her skin crawl. "Well now, didn't expect to find a pretty lady out here all alone." "I'm not alone," Sarah said firmly, keeping the rifle steady. "My husband will be back any moment." "Husband?" The drifter's smile was knowing. "Heard in town there was a Scarlet woman staying out at the Morrison place. Didn't hear nothing about a wedding." Sarah's cheeks burned, but she kept her voice level. "What you heard and what's true are two different things. Now move along. Maybe I'm tired. Maybe I could use some hospitality." He shifted in his saddle, and Sarah saw his hand move toward his gun. She fired, the bullet kicking up dirt inches from his horse's hooves. The animal reared, and the drifter fought to control it. "Next one won't miss," Sarah said, working the lever to chamber another round, proud that her hands stayed steady. "Git!" The man stared at her for a long moment, then wheeled his horse around. "This ain't over, woman. A man's got rights to hospitality in this country. Not at the end of a rifle, he doesn't." Sarah replied. She stayed on the porch until he was out of sight, then stumbled inside on shaking legs. When Thomas returned at sunset, he found her sitting at the table, the rifle across her lap. "What happened?" He was beside her instantly. "Checking her for injury," Sarah told him, watching his face darken with each word. When she finished, he pulled her into his arms without thinking, holding her tight against his chest. "I should have been here," he muttered into her hair. "Should have known better than to leave you alone." "I handled it," Sarah said, her voice muffled against his shirt. "You taught me well." "You could have been hurt, if he'd been faster, if there'd been more than one." His arms tightened. "I can't lose you two, Sarah, I can't." The words hung between them, heavy with admission. Sarah pulled back enough to see his face, saw the fear and something deeper in his eyes. "Thomas," she whispered. He cupped her face in his calloused hands, his thumbs brushing over her cheekbones. For a moment, she thought he would kiss her. Then he seemed to remember himself, stepping back, his hands dropping to his sides. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. Please don't apologize," Sarah said. "Not for caring, not for that." That night, she heard him drag his bedroll outside her door, standing guard like some medieval knight. She wanted to tell him it wasn't necessary, but understood he needed to do it as much for himself as for her. Lying in the dark, Sarah touched her face where his hands had been, and admitted what she'd been fighting for months. She was in love with Thomas Morrison, not from gratitude, not from proximity, but from the thousand small moments that had built something true between them. The question was, what to do about it? When he was so determined to be honorable, and she was equally determined not to ruin the fragile peace they'd built. But spring was here, and with it came change, whether they were ready or not. The first sign of trouble came on a Sunday morning in early April. Sarah was hanging laundry when she spotted the dust cloud, several riders approaching from the direction of Cedar Ridge. Her stomach clenched with familiar dread. In the months since she'd come to the ranch, they'd had few visitors. Those who came were usually looking for Thomas on business, and they kept their interactions brief and cold. But this was different. Even from a distance, she could sense the hostility in the way they rode, fast and purposeful, like men on a mission. "Thomas," she called, trying to keep her voice calm. He was in the barn, mending harness. "We have company." He emerged, took one look at the approaching riders, and his face hardened. "Get inside." "Thomas, inside. Sarah, now." She'd learned to recognize when he wouldn't be argued with. Sarah gathered her washing and retreated to the house, but positioned herself by the window where she could watch. 6 men reined up in the yard. She recognized several: Harold Garrett, who ran the general store, Carl Hensley from the bank, and Judge Porter's eldest son, William. The others were hands from neighboring ranches, men who followed wherever the wind of righteousness blew. "Morrison," Garrett called without dismounting. "We need words with you." Thomas stood in front of the porch, relaxed but ready. Sarah had seen him like this when wolves came too close to the livestock, calm on the surface, but coiled to strike if needed. "Say your piece, then." "It's about the woman," William Porter said. His young face twisted with the kind of moral certainty that came from never having faced real hardship. "The whole town's talking. It ain't decent. Keeping her here. Since when is giving someone work indecent?" "Work," Carl Hensley laughed, ugly and knowing. "That what you're calling it? Everyone knows what kind of woman she is. Morrison, what kind of work she's suited for." Sarah's hands clenched at the curtain. She saw Thomas's shoulders tense, saw his hand drift toward where his gun belt usually hung, but he'd left it inside, hadn't thought he'd need it on a peaceful Sunday. "Careful, Hensley," Thomas said quietly. "That's a lady you're talking about." "Lady?" Garrett spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "She's, Choose your next word very carefully." Thomas interrupted, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "Because I'll make you eat it, along with several of your teeth." The men shifted uneasily. They'd come expecting to intimidate with numbers, but Thomas Morrison was not a man easily cowed. "Now see here," Judge Porter's son blustered. "We're respectable folk. We got wives and daughters to think about. Having that woman here, flaunting herself. Mrs. Whitman works for me," Thomas said firmly. "She keeps house, tends the garden, helps with the animals, everything proper and above board. If your minds run to other directions, that's your failing, not hers." "You expect us to believe that?" Hensley pressed. "A man like you, alone for years, suddenly taking in a young woman? We weren't born yesterday. Morrison. No, you were born small-minded and mean." Thomas shot back. "And you'll die the same way. Now get off my land." "Or what?" William Porter had dismounted, emboldened by numbers. "You'll take us all on? For her?" "If I have to." The words were quiet, matter of fact, and somehow more threatening for it. But Porter kept coming, his face flushed with righteous anger and something else, the excitement of a bully who smelled blood. "Maybe we should ask the lady herself," he said, turning toward the house. "See what she has to say about—" He never finished. Thomas's fist caught him square in the jaw, sending him sprawling in the dirt. The other men surged forward, and suddenly the yard erupted in violence. Sarah watched in horror as Thomas fought 6 men. He was strong and skilled, but the numbers were against him. She saw him take a blow to the ribs, another to the face, saw him go down to one knee as Garrett kicked him from behind. Without thinking, she grabbed the rifle and burst onto the porch, firing into the air. The shot froze everyone. "The next one goes into someone," she announced, levering another round. "Now back away from him." "Look at that," Hensley sneered, though he stepped back. "The protective, ain't that sweet?" "It's done," Sarah said, keeping the rifle trained on them. "You've made your point. Now leave." "This ain't over," Garrett warned, helping Porter to his feet. The younger man's jaw was already swelling, his eyes murderous. "You can't stay here forever, and Morrison can't protect you all the time." "I don't need protection," Sarah replied. "As you can see." They mounted up, throwing dark looks back. As they rode away, William Porter shouted, "You got 1 week to send her packing. Morrison, after that, we come back, and we won't be talking." Sarah lowered the rifle and rushed to Thomas. His lip was split, one eye already swelling shut, and he held his ribs as he struggled to stand. "Let me help," she said, getting under his arm to support him. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're bleeding and probably have broken ribs." She helped him inside, fury and fear warring in her chest. "This is my fault. I should leave. Tonight, before... No!" He caught her hand, wincing at the movement. "You're not running because of those bastards. Thomas, they'll burn the ranch. They'll kill you." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'm not worth that." "You are to me." The words hung between them, raw and honest. Sarah stared at him. This good man who just fought 6 others for her honor, who was willing to risk everything rather than bow to their hatred. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do I matter so much?" He reached up with his less injured hand, touching her face gently. "You know why." "Say it," she breathed. "Please, I need to hear it." "I love you," Thomas said simply. "I've loved you for months. Probably since that first week when you tried to pay me back for saving your life by darning every sock I owned." A slight smile crossed his battered face. "I love your strength, your kindness, the way you hum when you think I'm not listening. I love that you're not afraid of hard work or hard truths. I love you, Sarah Whitman, and I'll be damned if I let those small-minded fools drive you away." Sarah was crying in earnest now. "I love you too, so much it terrifies me. But Thomas, love isn't enough if it gets you killed." "Then we'll face them together," he said firmly. "I'm done hiding what I feel, done pretending this is just about work or propriety. You're not my housekeeper. Sarah, you're the woman I want to spend my life with, if you'll have me." "They'll never let us be," she said, even as her heart soared. "You heard them. We have a week before, then we have a week to prepare." Thomas interrupted. "And to make some decisions." He struggled to sit up straighter, caught her hands in his. "Marry me. Not someday. Not when this blows over. Now. This week. Let them come for my wife and see how that changes things." Sarah's breath caught. "Thomas, marriage won't make them accept me. It might make things worse for you. I don't care about their acceptance. I care about you, about us, about building a life together without apology or shame." His grip tightened. "Say yes. Sarah, say you'll be my wife." She looked at his battered face, saw the hope and determination there, and felt her last walls crumble. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you." He pulled her down for a kiss, gentle despite his split lip, and for a moment the outside world ceased to matter, but reality intruded too quickly. "We need to plan," Sarah said, pulling back to examine his injuries. "If they're coming back, I have friends too," Thomas said. "Men who owe me favors, who don't like bullies any more than I do. We won't face them alone." He caught her hand again. "But first, let's get married. Tomorrow, if we can find a preacher willing. Reverend Mills would never. Not Mills. There's a circuit preacher, Father Miguel, comes through the Mexican settlements. He married my foreman's daughter last year. Doesn't care much for the town's politics." Thomas managed a grin despite the pain. "What do you say? Soon to be Mrs. Morrison? Ready to make those bastards really angry?" Sarah kissed him again, tasting blood and promise. "Let them come," she said fiercely. "I'm done running, done being ashamed. We'll face them together." Outside, The sun climbed higher, indifferent to human struggles, but inside the small ranch house, two people who'd found love in the unlikeliest circumstances prepared to fight for their right to it. The battle lines were drawn, and Sarah knew the coming days would test them in ways they couldn't imagine. But for now, for this moment, she was content to tend Thomas's wounds and plan a wedding that would shake Cedar Ridge to its narrow-minded foundations. The night before the threatened deadline, Sarah stood watch at the window while Thomas cleaned his rifle for the third time. They'd been married 4 days now. A simple ceremony with Father Miguel and 2 witnesses from the Mexican settlement who asked no questions about Sarah's past. The thin gold band on her finger, Elizabeth's ring, which Thomas had kept in a drawer, caught the lamplight as she shifted the curtain aside. "Anything?" Thomas asked without looking up. "Not yet." Sarah let the curtain fall. "Maybe they won't come. Maybe the marriage. They'll come." His voice was grim. "Men like that don't make empty threats. Pride won't let them back down now." A knock at the door made them both freeze. Thomas grabbed his rifle, motioning Sarah behind him. "Who's there?" "It's Sam Brooks. Morrison. I brought some friends." Relief flooded through Thomas as he unbarred the door. Sam was his foreman, a steady man who'd worked the ranch for 5 years. Behind him stood 6 other men, ranch hands and small farmers who lived outside Cedar Ridge's social circle. "Heard you might have some trouble brewing," Sam said, his weathered face serious. "Thought you could use some company." "Sam, I can't ask you to." "You didn't ask. We volunteered." Juan Martinez stepped forward, the man who'd witnessed their wedding. "Father Miguel told us what those town men said. About your wife. It's not right." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. These men barely knew her, yet they'd come to stand with them against the town's hatred. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank us yet, ma'am," another man said. "Night's still young." They didn't have long to wait. Just after midnight, Sarah spotted torches moving through the darkness, far more than 6 riders this time. The mob had grown. "They're coming," she called. 20, maybe more." The men took positions around the house and barn. Thomas tried once more to send Sarah to the root cellar, but she refused. "My place is beside you," she said firmly, checking the load in her rifle. The mob stopped just outside rifle range, their torches casting dancing shadows. Harold Garrett rode forward, and Sarah could see the liquor shine in his eyes even from this distance. "Morrison, send out the woman and we'll leave peaceful like." Thomas stepped onto the porch. "Mrs. Morrison is staying right where she belongs. You're the ones who need to leave." "Mrs. Morrison?" Someone in the crowd laughed ugly. "You actually married the—" The word was cut off by the crack of a rifle. Sam Brooks levered another round, his warning shot having kicked up dust at the speaker's feet. "Watch your tongue when speaking about a man's wife." "You brought help," Garrett observed. "Won't be enough?" "Maybe not," Thomas called back. "But some of you will die trying. Question is, who wants to be first?" The mob stirred uneasily. It was one thing to terrorize a lone man and a defenseless woman. Armed resistance was another matter entirely. Then William Porter pushed to the front, his face still bruised from Thomas's fist. "I'll go first," he snarled. "For what you did to me, Morrison. And for harboring that?" This time it was Sarah who fired, her bullet taking off Porter's hat. "The next one goes lower," she announced, her voice carrying clear in the night air. "I've had enough of your filth. William Porter, you and all the rest who hide behind righteousness while spreading poison." "You hear that?" someone in the mob called. "She threatened him. That's attempted murder." "That's warning shots to trespassers," a new voice corrected. Sheriff Ben Cooper rode through the crowd, his badge glinting in the torchlight. "Which is legal, gathering a mob and threatening folks? That's not." Sarah's heart sank. Cooper had never been friendly to her, though he was generally fair. She expected him to side with the town. "Sheriff," Garrett started, "we're just trying to protect the moral fabric of our community. By forming a lynch mob?" Cooper's voice was dry. "That what you call moral these days? Harold?" We weren't going to lynch anyone. Porter protested. Just run her off. She's a legally married woman living on her husband's property. Cooper interrupted. I checked the records myself. Father Miguel filed the papers all proper. Whatever misses. Morrison might have been before. She's a respectable married woman now. You can't be serious. Garrett sputtered. Everyone knows what she is. I know what gossip says. Cooper replied, I also know Martha Hensley was seen coming out of your storeroom looking mighty disheveled last Tuesday. Harold, should we form a mob for that? Or maybe discuss why Judge Porter's son was thrown out of Miss Molly's establishment in Billings last month? The men shifted uncomfortably. Porter's face went red even in the torchlight. That's different, he mumbled. Is it? Cooper asked. Seems to me sin is sin, if that's what we're discussing. But last I checked, I enforce law, not gossip, and the law says these folks have a right to live in peace. You're taking their side? Garrett couldn't believe it. I'm taking the law's side. Now disperse, all of you, before I start making arrests for disturbing the peace. Cooper's hand rested on his pistol. And if any accidents happen to the Morrison Ranch after tonight, I'll know exactly where to look for suspects. The mob began to fragment, men suddenly remembering they had early mornings and work to do. But Garrett wasn't finished. This isn't over, he called to Thomas. You can't protect her forever, and you, he pointed at Sarah. You'll bring nothing but ruin to him. It's what your kind does. Sarah felt Thomas tense beside her, but she placed a hand on his arm. Mr. Garrett, she called, her voice strong. I've brought him happiness. I've brought him love. I've brought life back to this house. If that's ruin, then I'll gladly give him more. Well said, Cooper murmured, loud enough for those nearby to hear. He raised his voice. Now, folks, time to head home. Show's over. Slowly, reluctantly, the mob dispersed. Cooper remained until the last torch disappeared into the darkness, then touched his hat brim to Sarah. Ma'am, Morrison, have a peaceful night. Sheriff, Thomas called as he turned to go. Why? Cooper paused. My Mary died having our second child. Doctor wouldn't come because we couldn't pay cash up front. Only person who helped was a woman the town called Trash because she'd been a saloon girl. She stayed 3 days, saved my daughter's life. Asked nothing in return. He looked directly at Sarah. I learned that night that reputation and character are 2 different things. Sleep well. After he left, the defenders began to drift away too, each shaking Thomas's hand and tipping their hats to Sarah. Soon, only Sam Brooks remained. They'll be back, Sam said quietly. Maybe not as a mob, but the harassment won't stop. I know, Thomas replied, but we'll face it as it comes. Sam studied them both, then smiled. Elizabeth would have liked her. He told Thomas, would have said she's got spine. After Sam left, Thomas barred the door and pulled Sarah into his arms. They stood there in the darkness, holding each other, processing how close they'd come to disaster. I'm sorry, Sarah whispered against his chest. This is all because of me. No. Thomas pulled back to look at her. This is because of their small minds and smaller hearts. You did nothing wrong, Sarah. Not then, not now. The sheriff surprised me. Ben Cooper's a complicated man, but fair, mostly. Thomas touched the ring on her finger. We're really married. They can't change that. No, Sarah agreed. They can't. That night, for the first time since their wedding, they shared a bed as husband and wife in truth. It wasn't about passion, though that was there. It was about claiming their right to love, to choose, to build a life together despite those who would tear it down. Outside, the Montana night stretched peaceful and vast. And if trouble would come again tomorrow, or next week, or next month, for now they had each other, and that was enough. Retried. The boycott began immediately. Within days of the confrontation, Thomas discovered that no merchant in Cedar Ridge would sell to him. The mill refused to grind his grain. The bank called in a small loan that wasn't due for 6 months. Even the doctor turned him away when he sought treatment for a horse's injured leg. "We'll manage," Thomas said grimly after returning empty-handed from another trip to town. "I can trade with the settlements. Drive the cattle to Billings if I have to." Sarah watched him unload the wagon, a few supplies bartered from Mexican farmers. Nothing close to what they needed. The garden was producing well, but they couldn't live on vegetables alone. Their flour was running low, coffee nearly gone, and winter would come again. "This is killing the ranch," she said quietly. "No, we're adapting." But she heard the strain in his voice. A week later, their isolation deepened. The neighboring ranches stopped buying Thomas's horses, canceled contracts for breeding. Sam Brooks came by, hat in hand, to say his wife was pressuring him to find other work. "I'm sorry, boss," Sam said, unable to meet Thomas's eyes. "But I got 3 kids. Can't have them shunned at school because of where their PA works." "I understand," Thomas said, though Sarah saw how the betrayal cut him. After Sam left, they sat in silence. The ranch that had once employed 6 hands was down to just them. The work was becoming impossible. Cattle to tend, horses to train, fences to mend, and no one to help. "I'll leave," Sarah said suddenly. "I'll go to California, like I planned. You can tell them I abandoned you. They'll take you back." "No." Thomas's voice was iron. "We're married. Sarah, for better or worse. This is the worst part. But we'll weather it." "How? We can't run a ranch alone. We can't buy supplies. Soon we won't even be able to—" She was cut off by the sound of horses. They both grabbed rifles, but relaxed when they recognized Juan Martinez approaching with 2 other men from the Mexican settlement. "Senor Morrison," Juan called. "We hear you need hands. We need work. Juan, I can barely pay. We'll work for shares. Help with the roundup. Take payment in beef." Juan's smile was sly. "The town may not trade with you, but they still buy from us. We can be, how you say, middlemen." It was a lifeline, thin but real. Thomas shook their hands gratefully while Sarah prepared coffee with their dwindling supply. For a month, this arrangement held. The Mexican workers were skilled and loyal, caring nothing for Cedar Ridge's opinions. The ranch began to stabilize. Sarah learned to make tortillas, to stretch their supplies with unfamiliar but nourishing foods. She practiced her Spanish while teaching Juan's young nephew to read English. Then came the night that changed everything. Sarah woke to the smell of smoke. "Thomas!" she shook him urgently. "Fire!" They rushed outside to see the barn ablaze, flames already licking at the roof. The horses were screaming, trapped inside. "The water buckets!" Thomas shouted. But they both knew it was hopeless. The fire was too big, spreading too fast. Thomas ran for the barn door. "The horses—" "No!" Sarah grabbed him. "You'll die!" He shook her off and plunged inside. Sarah followed, the heat hitting her like a physical blow. Through the smoke, she could see Thomas fighting with stall latches, releasing terrified animals. A beam crashed down, showering sparks. "Get out!" Thomas yelled, leading Penny toward the door. The pregnant mare was wild with fear, fighting him. Sarah grabbed a blanket, threw it over another horse's head, and let it out. Back and forth they went, Sarah losing count of how many trips, her lungs burning, skin blistering from the heat. On her last trip in, she found Thomas trapped beneath a fallen beam, his leg bent at an unnatural angle. "Go!" he gasped. "Save yourself. Not without you!" Sarah braced herself and lifted with strength born of desperation. The beam shifted just enough for Thomas to drag himself free. Together they stumbled out as the barn roof collapsed behind them. They lay on the ground, gasping, as Juan and the other workers arrived, having seen the glow from their camp. The barn was beyond saving, but they formed a bucket line to keep the fire from spreading to the house. Dawn revealed the devastation. The barn was ash and twisted metal. They'd saved most of the horses, but their hay supply, tools, and tack were gone. Thomas's leg was badly broken. Sarah could see bone through the torn flesh. "We need the doctor," she said. "He won't come." Thomas's face was gray with pain. "Then I'll make him," Sarah saddled a horse and rode hard for town, arriving at Dr. Pritchard's home as he was sitting down to breakfast. She pounded on the door until he answered. "I told Morrison I won't," he began. Sarah pushed past him into the house. "Your oath says, first do no harm. Does that include letting a man die because you disapprove of his wife? Now see here." "No, you see." Sarah's voice was deadly calm. "Thomas Morrison's leg is broken. Badly. Without treatment, he'll lose it. Maybe die. You'll come now, or I'll make sure everyone from here to Billings knows that doctor. Pritchard let a man die over gossip. You can't threaten me. You—" Sarah stepped closer. "I've lost everything because of what this town thinks of me. My reputation, my home, my safety. I have nothing left to lose. Doctor, but you have a practice, a reputation, a comfortable life. Come with me now, or I'll dedicate my life to destroying all of it." Something in her eyes must have convinced him. "Doctor." Pritchard gathered his bag, muttering about extortion and improper women. The doctor worked on Thomas's leg in tight-lipped silence, setting the bone and stitching the gash. He left medicine for pain and infection, accepted payment from Sarah's hidden emergency fund, and departed without a word of comfort. That night, as Thomas lay fevered and delirious, Sheriff Cooper arrived. "Barn fires happen," he said carefully, "especially when lanterns get knocked over." "There were no lanterns lit," Sarah replied. "Too tired for games." Cooper nodded slowly. "Figured as much, but without proof. Hands are tied." "I know." He studied her, soot-stained, exhausted, fierce. "You saved most of the stock?" "Yes." "And Morrison?" "He'll live. Keep the leg too, God willing." "You did that? Went into a burning barn?" "He's my husband," Sarah said simply. Cooper was quiet for a moment. "I'll put word out that I'm watching this place. Might discourage further accidents." After he left, Sarah sat beside Thomas, bathing his fevered face and praying. Juan and the others had promised to stay and help, but she knew the truth. They couldn't rebuild the barn without credit. Couldn't buy feed for the horses without merchants willing to sell. The ranch was dying, and all because she dared to love and be loved. But as Thomas's hand found hers in his delirium, as he mumbled her name like a prayer, Sarah knew she wouldn't change a thing. Let them burn every barn in Montana. She'd face hell itself before abandoning this man who'd given her back her life. The fire had been meant to break them. Instead, it had only forged their bond stronger, tempered in flames and desperation. Whatever came next, they would face it together, even if it meant standing alone against the world. Thomas's recovery was slow and painful. For weeks, he lay fevered and weak while Sarah fought to keep the ranch running. Juan and his companions worked tirelessly, but without a barn, without supplies. Each day was a battle. The horses huddled under makeshift shelters. Feed ran dangerously low. Then came the October blizzard, unseasonably early and brutal. Sarah had seen it building in the northwestern sky, felt the pressure change that promised catastrophe. They'd barely finished moving the horses to the lee side of the house when it struck. For 3 days, the storm raged. Temperatures plunged far below freezing. Snow piled higher than a man's head. The Mexican workers, camped in tents since the bunkhouse had burned with the barn, took shelter in the house. 7 people crammed into the small space, rationing food that was already scarce. On the second night, they heard it, the bellowing of cattle in distress. Thomas tried to rise from his sickbed. "The herd," he gasped. "They'll freeze in the open. You can't walk," Sarah said firmly. "I'll go." "No," Thomas grabbed her arm. "You'll die out there, and we'll all starve if we lose the cattle." She pulled on every piece of warm clothing they had. "Juan, Miguel, help me. We need to drive them to the canyon. There's shelter there." The 3 of them ventured into the white fury. Sarah couldn't see 5 feet ahead, but she knew this land now, had learned its contours through seasons of work. They found the cattle bunched against a fence line, already starting to freeze. What followed was a nightmare of wind and snow and desperate animals. They fought to turn the herd, to drive them toward safety. Sarah's face went numb, her hands frozen to the reins. Once she fell from her horse and nearly didn't get up, the snow so inviting, promising rest. But Juan pulled her back to her feet, shouting words the wind tore away. They saved most of the herd, though they lost dozens, when they finally stumbled back to the house. Sarah couldn't stop shaking. Thomas held her with his one good arm while the others piled blankets around them. "You foolish, brave woman," he whispered into her ice-crusted hair. The storm broke to reveal a transformed world, but also to reveal something else, wagons approaching from town. Sarah grabbed the rifle, expecting trouble, but lowered it in shock. The lead wagon carried lumber. Behind it came others loaded with supplies. Sheriff Cooper rode alongside, and with him several townspeople, but not the ones Sarah expected. These were the quieter folk, the ones who'd never joined the gossip, never thrown stones. "Mrs. Morrison." Cooper touched his hat. "Heard you folks had some trouble." Behind him, Martha Hensley, the banker's wife who'd been whispered about, climbed down from a wagon. "I've brought preserves and blankets," she said, not quite meeting Sarah's eyes. "I know what it's like to be talked about, to have one mistake define you." Others came forward. The German baker who'd always been kind, the widow who ran the boarding house, the blacksmith who'd married a Chinese woman and knew about prejudice, people who'd been silent now choosing sides. "Why?" Sarah asked, overwhelmed. "Because you saved Morrison's life in that fire," Cooper said. "Because you went into that blizzard for the cattle. Because maybe we're tired of Harold Garrett deciding who's worthy and who's not." Even Reverend Mills had come, looking uncomfortable but determined. "I was wrong," he said simply. "Christ ate with tax collectors and sinners. Who am I to do less?" They raised a new barn in 2 days, the community working together. Not everyone. Garrett and his faction stayed away, seething. But enough, more than enough. As the frame went up, "Doctor," Pritchard approached Sarah. "I owe you an apology," he said stiffly. "And Morrison, my oath should have mattered more than town opinion." Sarah nodded, too moved for words. The tide hadn't turned completely, might never turn completely, but it had shifted. That evening, as the workers celebrated with a meal Sarah and the ranch wives had prepared, a rider approached. William Porter, his face set in hard lines. Everyone tensed, but he raised empty hands. "I came to talk. Just talk." Thomas, leaning on a crutch, nodded warily. "My father's dying," Porter said abruptly. "Has been for months. Cancer. Doc says," all his talk of morality, of protecting the town. It was fear of dying, of leaving a world he couldn't control. He looked at Sarah directly for the first time. He said things. We all did. Wrong things. I'm not asking forgiveness. Just wanted you to know. Not everyone feels that way anymore. He wheeled his horse and left without waiting for response. Winter came properly after that. But the Morrison Ranch was ready. The new barn stood strong. The community help had given them breathing room. Thomas's leg healed slowly but well, and gradually. The boycott crumbled. First one merchant, then another, began trading with them again. Economics trumped prejudice. Morrison beef was quality, and quality sold. On a clear December morning, Sarah stood on the hill behind the house, visiting Elizabeth Morrison's grave. She'd taken to coming here, talking to the woman she'd never met but felt she knew. "Thank you," she said softly, "for the clothes, the recipes, the garden plans, for loving him first and teaching him to love well. I promise to take care of him." The wind stirred the dried grass, and Sarah felt a strange peace. Below, she could see Thomas working with a young horse, his movements still careful but determined. Smoke rose from the chimney of their home, built on sorrow but filled now with hope. As she walked back down the hill, Thomas called out, "Letter came from Ohio." Sarah's stomach clenched. James's family had written, after all this time, but when she read it, tears came to her eyes. James's sister, expressing regret for their coldness. She'd heard Sarah had remarried. was glad she'd found happiness. And a confession. James had written to her before he died, asking her to look after Sarah, saying she was the best thing in his life. They'd been too proud, too hurt by their loss to honor his wishes then. But if Sarah ever wanted to correspond, to share memories of James, "You all right?" Thomas asked, seeing her tears. "Yes." Sarah wiped her eyes. "Just the past making peace with the present." That Christmas was the first happy one either had known in years. Juan's family joined them, and several of the ranch families. The house rang with laughter, multiple languages, the cries of children. Sarah caught Thomas watching her with such love it took her breath away. "What?" she asked. "Just thinking how different this is from last winter. You nearly died in my barn, and you saved me." She kissed him softly. In every way a person can be saved. Spring would come again, bringing new life, new challenges. The town's judgment might never fully fade. There would be those who whispered still, who turned away when they passed. But Sarah had learned that redemption didn't come from others' opinions. It came from choosing love over fear, courage over shame, and building something beautiful from the ashes of what was lost. As the evening settled around them, full of warmth and belonging, Sarah knew that the journey from that frozen night to this moment had been worth every painful step. She was no longer the desperate woman who'd stumbled into a barn to die. She was Sarah Morrison, wife, rancher, survivor, and she was finally home. The Montana sky stretched endless above them, full of stars and promise. And in the small ranch house beneath it, two hearts that had found each other in the darkness continued to choose light, one day at a time. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect with fellow Western romance fans from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more tales of love, courage, and redemption from the American frontier. What did you think of Sarah and Thomas's journey? Share your thoughts below.